All right, so the time is 5:34. We are entering session. I'd like to take roll call attendance. Why don't we start with Mike Dick,
Mike Dick, present.
Corey Evans,
Corey Evans, present.
Ryan Host present, and Susan Franklin.
Susan Franklin, present.
Great, we're underway. So and we're 1 minute behind schedule. So the first item on our agenda is fields, courts, and playgrounds. We've got Michelle and Chris both here this evening. Thank you both for joining us. I apologize that we had a little bit of a disjointed series of emails that came over to you over the past 24 hours, but I forwarded them as they came. I didn't delay it to make it look pretty. I just kind of wanted to give you guys the earliest possible insight into the types of questions people would hope to address today, either in your prepared remarks or in the conversation that follows. So I'd turn it over to you on this. It's probably logical just to start with a quick update on this. I mean, we've, as a committee, have heard about this package back in the spring, so there's a decent degree of familiarity, and we discussed it as a committee recently. But I think it's important to just start with with an update on where we are and go from there.
Okay, so where we are today is we have the field, courts, and Beechwood Playground package before you. What this consists of is a renovated field at Deer Hill, which includes athletic lighting. And this has a multi-purpose field, which is natural grass, not synthetic turf. It will allow for gameplay for lacrosse and field hockey to have a home where they don't have a home today. In this package is also the lacrosse/sports wall for Sawyer Street. There's many benefits to that other than just playing lacrosse, and you'll see that in the presentation. We also have the tennis courts. It's been long debated, the tennis courts. Currently, there's 6 tennis courts in need of major rehab. We just learned that if our school makes it to the tournament, they will not be able to play any home games because they're not safe for tournament play. And lastly, we have the Beechwood Playground. There's been a lot of support for the Beechwood Playground. We did have a playground inspection done over the summer, and the inspection did highlight some deficiencies in the playground, which was ADA accessibility, which was some equipment that wasn't suitable for all ages. And I think I forwarded that report on, the inspection report, so you'd have it. Subsequently, we have had a hearing with the Access Board. The Access Board gave us until January to come up with a decision of what we're going to do with that playground and how we're going to remedy the ADA issues. And we let them know that our approach was to, fix it by renovating it in full. And they were happy with that, but they need to see some forward movement towards that, or we'll be back before them. So that's a highlight of everything we're asking for. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything, or you just want me to walk through the presentation.
No, nothing to add. Just we appreciate you getting us on the agenda for tonight, and we're happy to take any feedback that you have for us.
Thanks for doing it on short notice. I think we've all got our running shoes laced up over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so this is just going to run through exactly what we just spoke of. So this was a public forum that we had back in August, and we invited all the stakeholders. It was pretty well attended from all the members of youth organizations, some parents of athletes, as well as some community members from Open Space and the Recreation Commission. So we're going to talk about the tennis courts, the Deer Hill Field, Sawyer Street, and the Beechwood Playground. So here you see pictures of our existing courts. which, can you see them? Not in great shape, to say the least. The nets are sagging, the courts are cracked, there's grass growing through the cracks in the court. I know one question, and I'll address that now, was, okay, if we renovate these, how are we going to prevent cracking in the future because it's made of fill? And that's going to come in with drainage. So there's a new drainage system included in this price tag, which will allow the asphalt to stay crack free, if you will, for at least, they guarantee it for at least 15 years, and then you may have to crack seal after that. But the life of a tennis court is typically 20 years. You'll see that what we're looking for is the 6 renovated tennis courts, and in the renovation, they'll replace the retaining wall, which currently right now is pitted. It's cracking in many areas. It's really, I mean, you can see it in the background. And then what they're going to add is in the center. Right now in the center, the way the retaining wall was originally built is there's an outcropping, if you will, of concrete that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. No one's really sure why that was done that way. But what they're going to do there, because the retaining wall will be rebuilt, they're going to add almost a bullpen for the coaches for both home and away teams in the center, similar to what new tennis courts have. The price tag for this is $1.5 million. So the sports wall, otherwise known as a lacrosse wall. So a lot of communities are putting these up, and what we found is that they're not just for lacrosse play any longer. There's a lot of soccer players that are using them. There's tennis and pickleball players that are using them because it can be individualized. So if you can't find a partner, you can certainly use the wall as your partner and practice on it daily. It's great for muscle memory, footwork, and really the main thing here is you don't need a partner, and you're not destroying any public property, bouncing balls off the walls. I know a lot of people ask, why not just use the wall to the school? Well, our facilities team doesn't love that idea because the bricks need to be repointed more often because it does damage the walls. The estimated price tag for this is $100,000. And where that cost primarily comes from is the turf around the lacrosse wall. And the reason for the turf is because there is so much play around this wall that if you put just natural grass, it will wear out and you'll end up in a mud pit. But the wall itself, and we actually asked for CPC funding for just the wall, is $25,000. So next we'll talk about the multi-purpose field. So this multi-purpose field is at Deer Hill. Right now there's a beautiful grass field there. So people say, you know, why are we renovating this? Well, the only reason to renovate this is to add an additional field to our stock, which during the field study, we're short 17 fields. So this will take at least a couple of sports and put them on this field. Originally, they recommended turf. And the reason for turf is because it can be played 8 times more than a natural grass field. But because, you know, the community is not fond of turfing all their natural resources, we opted for a natural grass field here. The reason we need another field is Milliken needs rest, and that's really the primary purpose. You can't have a natural grass field being played on all the time because what happens is it turns into mud and then no one can play on it. This field, we're proposing athletic lighting to extend the time of play for many of our students. The question comes up, what about school recess? Well, it won't impact school recess because it's just another field. So summer program, it won't impact that. But it will impact youth sporting activities, and it will impact high school play because we'll have this additional field that kids can play more home games and be in their home turf. And then lastly, we'll talk about the Beechwood Playground. So we had the playground inspection. And what they indicated was it's not compliant with ADA. They recommend poured in place rubber opposed to the wood chips. And what we learned about the wood chips is, yes, they are ADA compliant once they're installed. After being run on for 24 hours, you lose your compliance because they don't meet the same requirements that they did. You need someone to rake the wood chips daily in order to remain ADA compliant and continue to have that level surface. So they recommend the poured in place rubber. You'll see that they also failed us on our fencing because our fencing is too low. It needs to be higher. There should be bollards in front of the fencing, crash rated bollards, because there's kids playing in the playground, and right now there's nothing there but a curb stop. The swings aren't adequate for an ADA compliant playground. And there's no toddler space, which is recommended by any playground inspector. I can tell you Recreation has agreed to contribute $14,000 from the turkey trot to this playground. They also have a link on their website for fundraising efforts. The estimated price tag is $350,000, and the town just applied for an ADA grant of $150,000 to offset the price of this playground. The reason we have to ask for the total amount is because the grant won't be awarded until December. So we can always deduct the amount of money if we win the grant. So those are at a high level of the projects. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So let me just lead off with the biggest question, which is, I think, we've got 4 projects here and some very big numbers. I personally would love to understand really the budgeting of this at a line item level, and also understand where those numbers came from and how we have gone about, or how we can go about getting some comfort that those numbers will actually cover this project.
Okay, so those are
Sorry,
great.
that was a very
No, it's a
sentence.
great question, and this is what I have. This was the first rendition. We've pulled some things out of here to lessen the price to make it that $1.8 million. But I'm going to share with you what we have from Activitas. They put this design budget together. It's very conservative in nature. But we have line item details like this for Deer Hill and for the tennis courts. We don't have something like this for the playgrounds because it's not warranted on a project that's only $350,000. It's only, removal of equipment, installation of equipment, poured in place rubber, and the price of the equipment. So it's very different than these projects that have the mobilization, the earthwork, and everything involved. And if these aren't on the website, I will get them on the website, but these are, as you can see from the design budget, the primary driver of this cost in excess is the lighting. It's $475,000 as a price tag.
And Michelle, just briefly on the lighting, because we did have a lot of conversation about the lighting last night at CPC. Gotten a lot of good questions on it. But right now, if kids want to practice, you really need to stop practicing at 6:30 because that's when it starts getting dark enough that you can't see the ball anymore. So the thinking here is that we're trying to create an opportunity for another field that we can use later into the evening, just to diversify the portfolio a little bit, to get more use out of the fields that we have.
The sports that would be played on this, as long as we're on the lights, the sports that would be played on this, are they played during the school year, after school?
confirm that field hockey is one of the sports, Ryan. So field hockey is active now. And right now is when it's starting to get dark around 6:30.
Right, and we're about to go to daylight savings time, which means it'll be getting dark at what, 5:30, and that will move up to more like 4:45 pretty quickly.
Right.
Okay, and where's lacrosse practice in the spring?
Lacrosse does use the Deer Hill field. Lacrosse is such a big sport, Brian. They really use everything. They use Milliken, they use Deer Hill, they use the sports complex over on top of the hill on 3A. I haven't seen a field that lacrosse doesn't use. It's such a
Okay.
popular sport.
Okay, and I assume the club kids play on weekends, but the varsity kids play after school.
I think the varsity kids also play on the weekends, Brian.
On weekends also.
Yeah,
Okay.
they do. And in youth plays, typically girls' youth plays Saturday and boys play Sunday or vice versa. So there's constant action for lacrosse.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the pressure in the evening. It's really a weekday issue more than anything else.
And just one last comment on this. If money were no object, we would be going to turf, because that is where you really get a field that you can use constantly and really beat it up, because the turf can handle it. But from a cost perspective and from an aesthetic perspective, it just didn't seem right for Deer Hill.
I'd also be careful about the turf discussion. I think the science and the data coming out of turf when it comes to impact on kids and exposure to chemicals is evolving quickly. So I think if that was proposed, there'd be valid other questions.
I agree.
Michelle, could you remind me, what was the number of fields we are short? You say 17?
Yep, we're short
Okay,
17
and-
fields.
All right, and this is one field, and this lighting is for one field.
Correct. And this
Okay.
will light this multi-purpose field, which could primarily be played with field hockey, lacrosse. It'll also light the softball.
And what's the data point to keep in mind when it comes to how many times a week a field can be used? I remember that was mentioned, but I know that's part of the calculation, but what's the guideline for that?
I don't have that in front of me.
I think
That'll-
that's in the Activitas.
Yeah,
study.
I think it's in the number 3 PDF on the website, if I'm not mistaken, but I can look at that really quickly.
Yeah, if you could pull that up, I don't know where that is. You're more familiar with it than I am.
Brian, are you taking questions by Zoom or should I just jump in?
Jump in.
Okay, because like to see us use our raised hands and so forth.
Apologies,
Going
Mike.
forward. Overall, Michelle and Chris, my concern is for the size and cost of this project alongside all the other projects coming before town meeting in November. My concern is that these different requests have not really been pared down, have not really faced the reality of, can the town really afford all of these different fields? Can the town afford a new town hall, and so forth? Has anyone thought of an alternate plan, a plan B, where you've reduced this overall request significantly so that you're going with what's truly essential versus nice to have? And without going into specifics, I feel that a lot of this is nice to have and non-essential. So that's my question. Do you have alternate plans, or can you come up with alternate plans that will significantly, and I'll say by half, reduce the cost for fields and courts? Oh, and one other side question. I don't see any reference to pickleball here.
So-
Was that deliberate?
So you raised two great points, Mike. One is what you're looking at is the pared down version. If you take a look at the Activitas study, it recommends a lot more than what we're coming forward with. And pickleball to me is the perfect example of something that we would like to do, but we're trying to be careful about how much money we're asking for. So we actually talked this morning about whether pairing this with pickleball might make it more appealing to people who might otherwise oppose it, because pickleball is a sport that captures more generational interest. So a lot of the things that we're coming forward with are more tailored towards younger school-aged children. Pickleball would be supported by a broader range of the population. So,
Yeah, I would agree.
but at the same time, adding pickleball to the portfolio just adds cost. So I do think that's something that's going to be coming at some point in the future. But I think including pickleball now, including everything that was in the Activitas report now, would be too much. So coming back to your first question, I think what you're looking at now is a pared down version of what we would ideally be asking for to address the realities of what can a town like Cohasset afford.
So it's gone from 4.1 down to what?
No, 4.1 is the ask today, Mike.
That was the ask that we heard the first time around, I thought.
But if you look at the Activitas study, there's a lot more in there.
Okay, so not to quibble, but the original request we had was 4 million, and I'm suggesting that you cut that 4 million down significantly. And
So
can you come up with the essentials? Truly come up with the essentials and get that number down to help balance the pressure on the taxpayers. The tax increases that are being proposed are heavy. And I think we on capital budget have to be very, very tough on supporting costs of project costs that drive up those taxes.
Can
Jill,
we,
were you trying? Sorry.
sorry, can we go back to the breakdown of costs? Because I glanced at 2 pages, and the one that was up the list had lights on it and about another $200,000 worth of stuff. I'm still trying to figure out how we get to $1.8 million on this field.
I'm going to pull it back up.
Please, yeah. And if it hasn't been distributed at some point, if you could distribute it so that we are not only looking at this online version. So yeah, so here I've got, 81 on the fence. I've got call it 500 on the lights, 40 on the drainage, 100 on the site. So what, I'm at 5, 6,
Well, we gotta
700
move
grand right there.
Well, yep. So let's start at page 1. Sorry.
Okay.
So a lot of the cost you'll see here is mobilization. Significant costs here.
So the mobilization ended up as 80, right? Is that
Mhm. Yep, 83,000.
is that right? No, because it's the subtotal above is 79. So that's the mobilization. Then you've got
Yep,
what,
and then you have the earthwork for 83,000.
yeah, earthwork for 83. Okay. And then we've got 327 for the natural grass field. Let me just look at this for a second. Okay. All right. And then fencing is the next page. So fencing's 81. Lights are 475. Okay, so that's drainage is 40. And then site improvements, this is what? Driveway, parking.
Many of these items have been revised. We just haven't received a new cost. So this is very conservative at the 1.8. Until we actually send out an RFP, we're not going to have our true costs.
Yeah. You got any feedback from anyone that, you think would be likely to bid on this as to whether or not they think these numbers are real or high or
So,
low or anything
yeah,
else?
so some of the research I did was I went to Weymouth, who just bid similar projects. And there was a town, I think Falmouth did a similar project, and these numbers are fairly conservative. I don't want to say I think they'll come in
Yeah.
lower, but my feeling is they may come in lower than what you're seeing there.
Okay. So basically we're spending as much on the lights as we are on the field, really, when it comes down to it. Okay. I mean, I'm going to say something similar to what Michael said, but in a completely different way. I think the risk here, given that, there's ultimately going to be an ask to taxpayers to pay whatever portion of this is not covered by CPC. There's a balancing act between sizing the project so that people say yes, versus one where people may be more inclined to say no. And I don't really know how to judge where that is, but this is, it's a big number for a field. Ultimately, people can decide how they want to spend their money on taxes and improvements. I think if this was in budget, it would be perhaps some different calculus.
What do you mean
Michelle,
by
one
in budget?
Sorry?
Go
What
ahead.
do you mean by in budget?
In budget, this is not being paid for out of the capital budget appropriation. This is not being paid for out of the existing tax base. This is being paid for by either CPC or a new tax. It's
Right, so
not in
what you're
budget.
suggesting is if this were within Chris Senior's annual operating budget for this year and perhaps subsequent years, that's what you're comparing this debt exclusion proposal to.
Yeah, I just want to be careful about terms. It's never going to be in the operating budget, but in the annual budget, where capital budget gets a piece of the annual budget and is held to that limit, yes, I think that's because then it would be in fact creating direct pressure on every other demand on that pool of funds. And fundamentally, it would be competing against departments, every one of the departments. And when you look at, for example, where last year's capital budget was spent, it was, there were a dozen items on there, but there were really 4 buckets, and there was 0 on that list that was discretionary. I mean, they were all things that had to be done. Whereas this is a bit more discretionary.
A couple more questions for Michelle, if it's all right.
Please.
So I remember in the Activitas report, and I got pulled up here. I mean, one thing that was bounced around on the topic of not over programming fields was the option to have a different maintenance schedule. I just pulled up the report. and changing how we maintain fields effectively would give us an extra field in that report. So if I'm going to do an A/B analysis, spending a million X, let's leave the lights off of it for a little bit, because I do want to get to that in a different way. What's the delta, right? What is if we maintain our fields better and we can program them more on them, that's creates effectively another field versus spending 1.4 million on this field that we then also have to maintain. So, is there a different way to what would be the cost to add that field if we did a maintenance thing? Do we still have that data is I guess my question.
So Corey, I agree with everything that you're saying. That is
Chris,
absolutely.
I just wanted to let Michelle, the question was for Michelle, if you don't mind. Thank you.
So if we had a different maintenance schedule, so now we'd have to make, it's a good point, Corey, we'd have to make the analysis of, who's going to maintain the field at the schedule that they recommended, which was aggressive, if you pull that up.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's real cost to
Yeah.
that. That's
Yeah.
I'm hoping we have some of that.
So I know Ted pulled together a maintenance schedule for us earlier in the year, and it would include a private landscaping company actually maintaining the field. It's really the only way to do it. Our staff just doesn't have the ability or expertise to maintain a field of that level. But while we're still short 17 fields, maintaining that one and adding another could just be a great resource, because we're going to have to maintain whatever we do is going to have to be maintained better, if you will, right? We can't keep building all these things and just not maintaining them.
Certainly.
So even if we maintain Milliken in a more aggressive manner, and add Dare Hill and maintain that, then now we have, a great
Okay. So, and then the second part is looking at that report. They've got I think it was 30 events or something is where the fields start to fall apart, right?
mhm.
So if we're looking that we're, having this be used for recess, my son just did a running day on it. I know that the PSO has this CEF. There's a lot of events on this field already.
Yeah.
Those don't go away, right, if we do this. So
No.
part of my question is, is this field going to be, if we're using it for competition, kind of be almost over programmed where now we're squishing other stuff in there? And if it's a lit field, then if we're using it at night, we're double using it. I'm just wondering if this field start getting to be a maintenance problem because of its existing use plus the additional use. Do you have numbers on that?
So I can appreciate that. Anytime you put lights on a field, you think it's going to be programmed more, of course, because you can play longer. And I think someone just made the point, maybe it was Brian, that on the weekends, the lighting's not going to be a factor, so the kids will get off that. So I think it's just going to have to be a maintenance schedule developed by Recreation to say, this is when we can program the field, this is when we can't. And I know there's already been a little rub over the past couple of years because they want to get sports on Milliken Field sooner, and it's wet. And we just, you can't play on a wet field, and it creates that friction between the schools and the town, and why can't we play? And we're just trying to look out for the best interests of everybody so we can maintain that one field. So if we had another spot, lights are great and they will extend the play. I don't think it will be overused by recess and things of that nature. I would be more concerned, to be completely honest, if it was turf and there was recess there. Mainly because of the heat, and kids bring snacks out to recess, and
Right.
It would gum up the turf, but not so much a grass field.
Yeah, and and then selfishly, which is, I've got 2 children that are going to be in Deer Hill, and we're on that field. Like and if this is unfounded, I'm all ears, but I don't want there to be a situation where we have to not open that field on recess because we're using it for competition. And it gets, beat up with one evening where it's rain and the game keeps going. And then, we've lost what is right now a really beautiful field for recreational purposes. I mean, that is a concern selfishly, for my children that use that.
Yep, I can understand that.
Susan, do you have any thoughts, any comments here?
Yeah, I was gonna ask a little bit about, there was a phase two in the original presentation that was Milliken Field. Is that phase two still on the table, or are you taking it off the table?
So I think that's been taken off, it's been tabled for now. So that's what I was gonna jump in, Chris, and say is, we have already pared this down to $4 million because originally the entire Activitas report was somewhere around 30 million or something wild like that to turf Milliken, add pickleball courts and tennis courts and a walking path and exercise equipment and all these really nice things. And I think we pared it back to say, well, this is really what the community needs now. And that's what the $4 million cost is. So Susan, I think that's been tabled for now.
Okay. And I think my only other thought on Deer Hill is parking is really difficult there. And we start to open that up for all of this use and away teams and things like that. What is the plan for that?
So the school is currently working on a parking plan. And they're working through the engineering company. They have talked about school bus parking there, and by adding the school bus parking, it would add an additional 12 spots for just usage. So the schools are working on a plan for additional parking.
Okay. And I only had one other question, not to get off the field, but a little bit up on the tennis court. 1.5 million for resurfacing and a retaining wall versus just resiting that in a different location on a flat area that's more conducive. I know we don't have a lot of areas, but was that looked into, and what would the cost, differential be?
It was, yeah, we did look into that. It's a great question because it was asked several times. And we just don't have the space because the space that we do have that's flat is wet, unfortunately. And the space that's available that's not wet has ledge or a lot of clearing. So the best location for it is where it is today, because the work has already been done. We will have to put more fill down. I think someone asked the question, but I think it's going to be the least costly option is to put it where it is today.
Okay.
Michelle, did we ever get a quote on that secondary natural grass field up at Deer Hill? That was on one of the reports, putting one like on the left there. Did that ever get?
The one at Osgood, putting one at Osgood and one
Sorry, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'll have to dig that out, but we did.
That was just another point of comparison, like adding a field. I know that was probably twice as much, but it would just be kind of a point of, just of understanding.
Sure, I'll find it and make sure you got it.
It's an interesting question, Corey.
Where would that field be sited at Osgood, in the back?
In the front?
Because the back is really wet.
Yeah, it's kind of the left of the access road. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of them. I
it.
didn't have. I thought that this project was at about 4. Again, I'm just off the top of my head. So, and Chris, if I'm wrong and you remember you've seen this, please jump in. But this with a synthetic turf and this together, I think was about 4. But I don't think we ever talked about just doing this part alone. But that always was an intriguing thing because it would be adding a significant amount of square feet field.
Mm-hmm.
So I apologize. Well, people were asking questions. I was just adding up the numbers, and I get to 1.3 million on this. I truly apologize, but can we just pull this back up? I'm trying to figure out.
I think you don't have the contingency costs in there.
That may be.
It's always contingency that gets us. Let me see.
Always does.
Yep. So 5% general conditions, 14% overhead, 20% contingency, 12% soft costs. And for those reasons is why I believe this is really going to come in less than the 1.8. Because that adds significant dollars to this.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's not apples to apples, but I just think about, a project like this versus the basketball courts. And the way that was done and the way, the way that gets costed in the end. I mean, this is just, it's just layer upon layer of additional cost. I don't know how else to say it. It's kind of public sector playbook. And before you start with a field that, between the field and the earth and the drainage is a $500,000 project, and you end up at 1.8. I mean, the lights are a big step, but I'll just repeat. I mean, I think there's I think there's a delicate line here, and I don't know exactly where it is, but I think the project, I think the taxpayers view this as at $500,000 or $750,000 very differently than at 1.8. So something to think about on the ask.
Michelle, is lighting something that could be added later?
So the select board did have a conversation about that in making it light ready. So if at a future date you want to add the lights, there's not a tremendous expense and you're not now digging up a beautiful field that you just planted. So that has been discussed.
And what does that mean? Does that mean adding the poles now and just not hanging the lights, or does that just mean making sure that we've got sufficient?
All the conduits and stuff will be there underground.
Okay.
And then they are obviously capped. And then if at a later date you decide to put the lights, you'll have all the mechanisms underneath to
Okay, and
so.
you'd have sufficient apron, for lack of better terms, around the edges to get a hole drilling, pole drilling vehicle there without having to cross the field.
Theoretically, I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
They were able to do that down at Freedom Field, so conceivably.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. And one of the questions that I think that the team had was how the experience has actually worked out with ball field lights on North Main. I mean, did we learn anything from that? Has it really, gotten us what us? I shouldn't say us. Has it gotten the town what people hoped it would get the town?
So I can just speak a little bit about, I don't know a tremendous amount. I can say that the neighbors originally that were fairly opposed to having the lights up really haven't seen a tremendous impact as they thought they would.
Yeah, it's really a question on playtime. I don't think we have, NIMBY issues here or butter issues really.
As far as playtime, I know that the kids were able to play on the lights under the lights only twice because the installation took longer than expected. But I believe it was a great experience. I haven't heard otherwise. I think the kids are looking
forward. Really is, are we getting the lift out of the lights?
I don't have an answer to that, only because they were installed later in the season than anticipated. So only 2 games were played under the lights.
Well,
okay.
If you can use the basketball, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Can we look at next season and see what the schedule looks like? That includes playing under lights.
It's kind of not an apples to apples though, Mike, because they're one privately owned and operated, and 2, it's kind of a different sport. It's for a youth organization, not for kind of town sports. So I'm not, even if we had that data, I'm not quite sure if we could translate it to how much it could impact us, right? I think we can probably do that math ourselves. I don't know if we'd learn much from the youth baseball usage. Just my thoughts.
Susan, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I was just going to say, if you use the basketball courts as a proxy, there's always kids on those courts at night.
At night, yes, there are.
Right, but does basketball as a sport make a difference versus lacrosse or field hockey?
Lacrosse and field hockey are very popular in this town.
Okay.
Amongst the South Shore, it's very popular. They're growing sports all over the South Shore.
I think what I'm trying to get at is to validate the need for lights. How much of a lift do you get with lights? So I'm just casting about for, comparisons or anything that can help us understand the benefit, the actual benefit, rather than something that sounds good or seems like it'll be okay or nice versus truly this is a great solution that we can point to as a true benefit to the town.
So,
Maybe-
sorry.
I was just gonna say, maybe one way to come at it is through a question I'll pose, which may which may address this. Will this sport be used after school for varsity sports? Forget town league for a section for a moment, or rec or club or whatever else is going to play on there. Is this a field that will be used or needs to be used for after school varsity or JV sports, or even middle school sports, but organized school sports that have to take place after school where there's a race against sunset?
I believe the answer is yes.
Okay. Can we find out, I mean, where do they play now?
So, right, the way I understand it from the athletic director is now they're splitting fields. So they're doing the best they can, splitting Milliken up into sections so everyone has some playing time
Yeah.
during daylight hours, but they're not getting that full field practice that most kids do get at the high school level.
Yeah, I mean, that may work for some sports. I mean, lacrosse, I'm just thinking out loud. We got a bunch of lacrosse parents on the phone here, former players, right? The highest levels of the lacrosse teams in the country, we'll have 3 squads on a field playing on a half, on a section of a field each. They, only once in a while do they go full field sort of scrimmage type play. So that probably works. I'm not sure it works. I mean, Corey, you played lacrosse at a high level. Maybe I'm speaking out of school, but I've watched club lacrosse, and that was my observation. I don't know about field hockey. Maybe they do need more full field.
So just from my experience, and I'm only talking from my experience because we're just talking.
You played. I forgot.
So if you're playing lacrosse on half a field and you have kids playing soccer next to you, those balls are hard,
Yeah.
they're fast, and they hurt. And you don't want anyone to get hurt by a lacrosse ball. And I can talk a little bit about the extent of lighting the field. And I think we're thinking of it purely as, a sporting benefit. But let's think a little bit about the benefit. I mean, I walk down the street all the time to our turf field here that's lit till 9 o'clock at night. And you see parents with their children practicing because they get home from work late and they have the opportunity to take their kids down there and practice. And it's different. The field down here is used all the time because it's lit. At 9 o'clock at night, you're kicking kids off the field to send them home who are practicing lacrosse, soccer. They're playing catch, they're throwing the football. It just does add a new dynamic to the community to see the kids out and playing all the time and to see the parents actually playing with them. So that's just from my experience.
Okay. Is our high school field lit and open at night after varsity practices occur?
I don't know.
We're doing some late night runs on it, so sometimes it is. Yeah.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, Michelle, and I can picture it. And it sounds idyllic, right? We already have a field. We already have lights on it. I mean, should we be turning them on? It's not really a capital budget question, but okay. And I know there was a question also about what's our actual usage of the Beechwood field for whatever demand it is that we have on baseball diamonds and other things. I mean, are we fully utilizing that field?
So we did look at adding a multi-purpose field over there as well. There's just not enough space to add a multi-purpose field, and it is used significantly by CYBSA. Special Olympics plays over there a couple nights a week, so it is utilized heavily by the baseball organizations.
Okay. And what happens when they go out of season? I mean, they're not playing baseball now, I assume. Are they? Maybe they are.
I don't believe so. I don't think that field is used that often when out of season because it's not, I mean, it's not sized appropriately.
Right,
But it could be used as a practice field.
right.
So you could have, so that you're not mixing sports on the same practice field, which I've never seen, but perhaps you have. But if you really are trying to segregate one sport from another, perhaps the Beechwood ball field could, its outfield perhaps, or part of the outfield and infield could be used for practice.
Once again, it would have to be
But,
practice.
we're not here to be recreation commissioners.
Right.
And
Right.
Chris Plex, are you here as a recreation commissioner or as a select board member?
I'm not on the Recreation Commission, so
Okay.
just
So-
as a select board member.
Right. And we've asked on multiple occasions why the recreation commissioners are not here to answer the questions, and they're putting it all on really Michelle's shoulders. I would feel a whole lot better if we were talking to people who are actually running the program. So I guess I'll just leave that as a disappointment.
Well, we're not voting this tonight. If
Mhm.
if they'd like to come and quench Michael's disappointment, which may or may not be shared
Well, it's
by
not
others.
quenching my disappointment. It's a question of being able to answer these kinds of questions on
Yeah,
programming. That's what we're trying to get to.
not
Is
to
this a
debate it.
good
I think
use
you're
of
spot
town
on.
funds for the
Michael, not to
program
debate it.
success?
You're spot on. We'd encourage them to join for the next discussion of this.
We're trying to assess the need.
Right.
And Michelle, to your credit, you've been very patient and you've done a great job in walking us through it. But I'm still not sure at all that the need is there.
Mike, would it be all right if I jump in for a second on this?
Of course, yes.
Please,
thank
Chris.
you. Yeah.
So what I have up on my screen, and I'm happy to share it, is the original recreational facilities needs assessment and master plan, which does go through the calculation of the 17 field need and the 11 field shortage. I know we've been throwing some numbers around, but it's laid out very clearly how they got to that number.
Mhm.
And a lot of what we've talked about tonight is how do we make sure that these investments are made in a way that's responsible. And unfortunately, I think we're in a position where we're a bit behind. So Mike, I'm happy to share the analysis so you can take a look at it.
I'd appreciate
Of
it.
course, we can
Yeah.
try to get the recreation folks out here, but mathematically, it lays out why we're short 11 fields, and throw stones at it if you'd like, of course.
Yeah, we're short 11, right? But total need is 17. Yeah.
This is the Activitas analysis.
Correct.
Yes,
Okay,
I'm happy to share it, send it around, whatever makes sense.
please.
Yep.
And I'd ask everybody to read it, just so that we can get over this hump.
Page 16, just put a pin in it in your heads. That's the page with the chart that Chris is referring to.
Okay.
And how are we managing the shortfall now? Do we just drop some sports?
No.
If
So
we're
we're
short
out.
that many
Sorry.
fields. how do
So
we
Mike,
ma-
we're outsourcing some of our play to Cohasset Sports Complex, so we're paying them for their field space. Oftentimes, if we don't have space, we'll ask Situate if we can borrow some of their field space. And then many times they have to cut down their number of practices. And then as far as play goes, we play away games.
And when you say we outsource, who's we, Michelle? Is that town operating budget that covers that? Is that rec budget that covers that?
So I believe it's school athletic budget that covers that. And then the youth organizations, it comes out of their own budget.
Can you come
Yeah.
up with an annual amount for what we pay because we lack sufficient fields?
I can go back to the youth groups and ask them and grab a number from Steve Rotundi.
Okay. Thanks.
So we move on to, do we have any other questions on fields?
Not at this point, no.
Should we move on to the tennis courts?
Sure.
I'll take that as a yes.
Sure.
So Michelle, you mentioned this drainage. There was also talk about, and Michael, I think raised it again tonight, possibly sort of call them portable pickleball overlays that you can roll out onto tennis courts quite easily at extraordinarily low cost. Is that something that's in here, or is that not in here?
It's not in there because it's something that's going to be taken care of by recreation.
Okay.
They're going to order it and they're going to put it on the basketball courts during the afternoon, and see if it takes off.
On the basketball court, this is behind the library. Okay.
I think that'll work as a pilot program. You know, we'll see if anyone actually.
It does. I'm going to step a little bit out of bounds with regards to capital budgets lanes here, and just ask, you know, doesn't that displace basketball? I mean, those courts are, first of all, they were, you know, pretty heavily funded, I think, by a basketball booster, and secondly, I'm pretty sure those courts are pretty heavily used.
This would just act as a pilot program to see if there was usage, and then if so, then we'll address it.
Okay.
But recreation is heavily involved in the pickleball arena.
Okay, so they're going to pilot that near term, probably way faster than these tennis courts are going to get built. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, and once the tennis courts get built, let's just say the pilot actually takes off, is the assumption that they would use those sort of portable pickleball overlays up on a couple of tennis courts, or?
I really think the idea is, if in fact it does take off prior to the tennis courts being built, I think there's an opportunity to line the 6th field for pickleball instead of tennis.
Okay. As opposed to just having a temporary overlay. Okay.
Correct.
All right. And there was a question, I know, from the committee with regards to how many we need to actually host a tennis match. You can line a 6, as I understand it, at least, having played tennis at a varsity level, albeit terribly. You need 5, because a lot of your top singles players are going to be your doubles players as well. So, you know, very rarely would you actually have all 7 matches taking place at the same time. Is that the thinking, or am I missing?
No,
Okay.
You're correct.
Okay. I usually got to watch all 7 matches, by the way, just to be clear.
So what you're saying is that for a tournament, you need 5 courts, and that a 6th one would be unused during a tournament.
No, for a varsity high school match, there are 5 singles matches,
Mm-hmm.
and there are 2 doubles matches. And oftentimes your top singles players will pair up for the doubles matches. So it's pretty rare that you would need 7. It frankly
For a
change.
match. I shouldn't have used the word tournament, but for a match.
Yeah, for a varsity match. And there are 6 up there right now, Michael. So
yeah,
they're using the same footprint and the same cut and fill, frankly, although it'll get completely redone.
You know, with all of these proposals, and we touched on this briefly when we were talking about the Dare Hill field proposal and maintenance, we really need to have an amortization line item in these budgets to cover future maintenance or replacements. And I don't see that kind of strategy in play here. And while we are spending $1.5 million, we're really not setting aside money to make sure that those facilities will stay in excellent condition. And this may be an unfair statement, but it just seems like we're willing to let them just be played on without having a program to make sure that they remain at a high level, so that we do get certainly 20 years out of them. I mean, what is the debt exclusion? Is it a 20-year debt exclusion? So, I mean, that's an arbitrary number for me to choose as, okay, let's make sure these facilities stay in great shape for 20 years until the debt is retired. And then we've got something. And perhaps we've got money then set aside for whatever improvements or expansion we want. But again, it's an observation, and it's really not a question. But I feel that we should be following that strategy of setting money aside whenever we expand a program, expand a capital facility, that we've got money set aside to maintain it.
Yeah, Mike, you're completely right. I mean, this goes back to the conversation about properly funding capital, having a capital plan, having a long term. These are all things that historically, I mean, the Town Manager Act was signed in 20 years ago, basically. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff that I think we're learning institutionally about how to do stuff, right? So I think that some of it's going to be, kind of a two shock paddles reboot. And then we have to be sure to exactly point, we properly fund capital, we properly project out needs, all those things. Because we don't, a lot of this stuff we shouldn't have to repeat. Yeah.
There's no question there are many things capital should be doing differently and better, all of which require higher levels of funding. And the steps that were taken a little over a decade ago went a long way to creating a funding mechanism, but we're also finding now over the course of time that it also didn't suffice. So that's where we are. Your observation spot on, Michael. I think the next iteration of the funding mechanism for capital budget needs to occur, and it needs to continue to improve the way this is done. All that said, with regards to courts, Michelle, when was the last time we redid these courts in their entirety and in terms of a resurfacing? And do you have any sort of color on sort of the crack, seal, and fix that we've done over the years? Because my understanding is these are very old courts, and that we had resealed and done surface repairs on them consistently over a very long period of time. I want to say decades, but I'll pause. What's reality, Michelle?
So I think someone who's lives in the community may be able to answer the question better than I as to how old they are. They're old.
So the quote last night on CPP came from Ginny Najmi that said she played on those courts as a kid and they've never been resurfaced. Now, they might have been and she missed it, but they're old courts. Pardon me.
I don't think she missed anything. I don't think she missed
anything. They're at least 20 years old.
At least 20 years old, right?
Giggling acknowledgement. Okay.
We've used them past their useful life. Let's say 25 years. Okay. And we have crack sealed for several years now. It doesn't even work because the cracks aren't cracks any longer.
Right. They're potholes.
So yeah, it doesn't work.
Okay, but am I correct that we have crack sealed over the decades?
And we've tried.
That actually worked for a long period of time until it got beyond that.
It did. We had them repainted. We had them crack sealed. It's
not going to work anymore.
They're tired. They're just tired.
Yep. Okay. Okay, and there is, I keep coming back to the drainage. So there's definitely drainage that's built into this. No lights, is that correct? Okay, anything else on tennis and pickleball before we leave it?
Not here.
Okay, shall we move on to Beechwood Playground? This is the next on the list. I guess my key question on this would be, I'm hearing that there could be ADA funding sources, alternate funding sources. What can you, well, number one, can you give us again a line item? This is probably easier than the fields, but can you give us a sort of a line item understanding of how, you know, of how we're going to spend this money, what the total for that piece of the project is, and what the possibility is on that other grant?
Sure. So
Is
the
it-
project in its entirety is about $350,000. That includes, you know, the new equipment, poured in place rubber. There will still be some wood chips here, but they won't affect the ADA compliance piece of it. New fencing, bollards, and new benches. So the $350,000 we're trying to offset with an ADA grant. The ADA grant in total is $250,000. We applied $150,000 towards Beechwood Playground, and the other $100,000 is for sidewalks and curbing ramps around the Beechwood field to allow for accessibility to the entire field, which will be the playground, the Little League or baseball field, and the basketball courts. So when you apply for these grants, they do ask you to think outside the box and, you know, don't apply it all to one item. Make sure that it's something for the community at large. And so that's why we incorporated the playground as well as the sidewalk ramps for total grant ask of $250,000. Based on what we've heard, they allowed us money to study this, to get the playgrounds inspected, to have the sidewalk survey done around Beechwood. And once you complete that technical piece, you then are able to apply for the construction piece of the grant. So they gave us the technical piece, they accepted it, and so now we applied for the construction piece. I'm not sure if they're going to award us the entire amount or a portion of it, but it's encouraged that you apply annually for a technical piece and then a construction piece, which we've done in sequence.
Okay, and so the application takes place in the fall. You get your answer in December. Is that the
Yep.
drill?
Yep, the
Okay,
application
so-
was due September 15th.
Okay, and interesting. Does the ADA board or whoever it is that's breathing down our necks know that we applied for that grant?
Yes, so that is one of the questions in the grant. It says, do you have any violations with the access board? And the answer is yes, we do have a violation. We have 2 violations with the access board, both that we need to remedy. One is going to be remedied by our facilities department, and that's at the library, and the other one is Beechwood.
Are these federal or state
State
agencies?
agencies.
State.
Do you have any ability to get the one state agency to tell the other state agency to give us the money?
Well, you would hope that they speak to one another.
Oh, you would hope.
Wasn't it a fax or something?
Of the 250,
Right? Inter-office mail.
the 250,000 that we're asking for, that's being asked for out of a pool of how much? How much money are they awarding? And is it an annual award, or is this a one-time program?
Nope, it's an annual award. And I think the pool that they're pulling from is $10 million.
Okay. And what is the cost for the equipment only? So if we did not replace the equipment, but use what was there, what does that save us?
I think $125,000.
And we did put 30,000 in, and I've certainly noticed the difference between last year and this spring, summer, when I visited the playground, I actually used it. So my feeling is that the equipment that's there is still usable. I saw your comment that there really isn't toddler space. That's generally true, but I've noticed with a grandchild that toddler playgrounds are specific to toddlers. Yes, you can have some toddler swings around, and there are toddler swings there, but the climbing structures and slides are not at Beechwood. They're for older kids, you know, 4 and up versus, you know, year and a half to 3. But I don't think that's enough of a reason to remove really well-functioning, clean equipment. So that's, you say 125 is the cost for the equipment? Or okay, thanks.
Michelle, who owns the playground? Is that the town or is it? It is the town.
Yeah, the town owns the playground.
Okay.
And up at the Osgood School, there is a toddler playground. How much use does that get? And
So-
what is its condition? And how is its ADA compliance?
So that playground was recently completely replaced not too long ago. It is ADA compliant. And it is used, it's used quite often. However, it can't be used during school hours because it's on school grounds. So if there's a young family in town, their only option is Beechwood or the library.
Right. And the library is definitely not a toddler playground.
No.
The library is also stuck during summer.
Yeah.
Summer rec program. It's bogged out. And just you know, as for the Osgood playground, I think my kids alone would make that playground a heavily used one.
Okay.
It's a great playground. Really good playground.
So Michelle, we don't know where CPC is on this yet. They were obviously, you know, for the benefit of those who didn't have the opportunity to watch last night, they discussed this package. Chris and Michelle jump in, but I think they were predisposed to this particular item in part because they had seen it and they were ready to go last year. You know, I think we have to see where they shake out. If the grant comes through, I assume that nobody would do anything on this, you know, Michelle, until in terms of placing purchase orders or whatnot, until we actually got an answer on the grant in December. Is that okay?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Okay, and then I guess the question would then be, you know, let's just say CPC appropriated X for this total package. If that grant came through, would that X stay the same and it would just simply cover more, for example, the fields or the tennis courts? We'd have to just, you know, you'd have to discuss that.
Right.
Probably
I would
coming back to the
assume
fund.
they'd probably want the money back. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they have you know, an aversion to funding the field, period, hard stop. Or if they funded the whole thing, right, and the grant came through, then certainly the money back. But if they're only going to fund a portion of it, and the taxpayers are on the hook for the remainder, it'd be nice if that portion sort of stayed the same, whether or not the grant came through.
Yeah, good point.
And then we just reduce the amount of the ban and the bond ultimately, and the you know, the excluded debt fundamentally.
Yeah, funding priority basically. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So that way the taxpayer's on the hook for what, you know, whatever's left after, you know, CPC plus 88, hopefully come through. Okay. Do we have any other questions on the playground? No. Okay, which brings us to the lacrosse wall. Michelle, I heard the ask to CPC is 25 grand, which is for the wall specifically. That's it. And I've also heard that there's possibly the boosters paying for the other 75. Where do we stand? What's the reality? I don't want to.
Yep. The reality is we're asking for $25,000. We did approach the youth organization. There's a Stu Curran fund that they're going to pull from. They're hoping to get, I think, $25,000 from there. There's the boosters, which is separate. And then there's youth lacrosse, which could do fundraising on their own. And then if in fact there was a small delta, we would see if recreation could help fund it. But the ask is $25,000.
To CPC. Okay.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be, so there's really nothing in that project that's contributing to a debt exclusion. Okay. I'll just mention this. I still get my daughter's USA Lacrosse magazine. I forget what it says on the cover, but I opened up the very last issue that came through, which was last month. Came through here about a week or two ago. Unfortunately, I threw it away. But I think on like the second page, there's a feature story about a town that just got its third lacrosse wall. It was a town about the size of Cohasset. I want to say it was like 8,000 people. And setting aside the fact that they advocated how great this was, they also mentioned that USA Lacrosse has a foundation that funds these things, and that they had funded, I think, 80% of that wall. So I mention it just to let people know that money's out there. And there are a ton of USA Club lacrosse kids in town, and we should throw a grant into that foundation.
So you bring up a really good point. The only challenge with USA Lacrosse, and I don't know where Cohasset positions, and I saw your question this morning and I did throw it out to somebody, but if Cohasset is a member of MYL is not a USA Lacrosse organization, therefore you can't apply for those grants.
What is it? MYL? I'm confused.
So it's Mass Youth Lacrosse, and
Yeah.
they've kind of taken over the state, if you will, and they don't get their insurance through USA Lacrosse. Therefore, you can't apply for the grants.
Okay, so if the town has a youth team that's not USA Lacrosse, then the town's sunk.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Could I ask, I guess, to Mike's earlier point, just for knowledge, what's the lifespan of a wall? How much maintenance does it cost?
So-
Whatever we're here. So
Yep. No, good question. So, lifespan of the wall, 25 to 30 years. It's a concrete wall. The turf surround is about 20 years. So I would say the whole project, I would say 20 years.
and what kind of is it, like just a
There's
the rubber
really,
turf, or is it like carpet turf? What?
it's carpet turf. Not a whole lot of maintenance.
And I assume this is just carpet turf over like some sort of gravel aggregate underneath, as opposed to like, sort of a full sub base like we have up at the high school.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. And I also assume that, impact rating doesn't play here. So it's really, you can probably play on this until, you're not doing, tackles on this turf.
Correct.
I hope. At least that's not what it's there for. We'll see what happens. But,
Right.
and that is what ultimately drove us to replace the turf up at the high school. It wasn't that the turf was coming apart. It was failing impact rating, and we were rising up the compression protocol risk. So maybe we'll get more, and I think we got well over 20 out of that turf, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully we can get some more legs out of this as well. Okay. All right, but the bottom line is CPC's got an ask for 25, and the lacrosse teams and whatnot are coming up with the other 75. All right.
So why is the lacrosse wall in this $4.1 million package if the funding is coming elsewhere, from elsewhere?
So everything in the package is we're asking CPC to fund.
But some of them may get bounced back, right? Is that kind of my understanding? So
Yeah.
there may be
Yeah.
some of this which is still an exclusion.
So I think where Michael's going is, if we knew, for example, that it's a 4.1 package, and we know that the 75 coming out of the boosters would reduce the package by 75, right? Because the booster money wouldn't necessarily flow through the warrant, I don't think. I guess the rec money would, the booster money wouldn't. So only the portion to the town would flow. So does that answer your, I'm just thinking out loud, Michael, does that make sense?
I want to know what we're being asked for. How much is capital budget being asked to recommend for a debt exclusion for fields and courts?
So I think that number is, I don't want to say to be determined, but to be determined based on what the CPC involvement is.
Okay. And there will be an answer from CPC before the warrant closes, do you think? Or we will have to wait for town meeting itself to know?
I
Um,
believe they're meeting Monday night, Michael, to decide on what they're gonna fund. So we'll
Okay.
know Monday night.
Okay, so we, capital budget, will need to revisit this because the number may well change.
Yes,
Okay.
I mean, there are two reasons we're not voting anything right now. Number one is all the stuff is still, being refined.
Mhm.
Number two is, I at least, and we can reopen this discussion, but for years we've been very uncomfortable voting warrant articles, which are subject to town manager motions, neither of which we've necessarily seen at the time of the vote, which means we're voting a concept as
Yeah,
opposed to actually
right.
voting a real thing, and that's extraordinarily dangerous. Hasn't blown up yet, but it's not really the right way to go.
Mhm.
I mean, you wouldn't bind yourself to a contract without reading it. This is language we should see before we vote it, so we know exactly what's in it. And I've delivered that message to Chris and Jean.
Great.
One thing I just clarify, Michael, you said how much capital budget is being asked to fund.
To
The answer is-
recommend,
sorry.
to recommend.
Yeah. I mean, we'll be asked to recommend, all of it, whether it's CPC money or whether it's debt exclusion or rec money. These items meet the threshold of a capital item, and it's all taxpayer money. So it's not just limited to whether or not it's coming out of the capital stabilization fund, is what I'm trying to say.
No, I hear you. I disagree in some respects, but that's not a debate to have here.
All right, do we have any other questions on fields, courts, walls, playgrounds? Okay. All right. Well, I think that wraps up the first item on our agenda for the evening. And we have 3 minutes to cover the rest. So, Chris, Michelle, thank you for your time and your
Thank you.
patience on these items. That may have felt tedious, but it's a $4 million ask. So I think in that context, actually probably went pretty quickly. Thanks. Why don't we move on to minutes? Sorry, Michelle.
I just want to ask one, I can't jump off anyway. As far as your Monday night meeting, I posted a meeting for you. I don't know if that's the agenda you wanted. I just threw something in because it had to be posted today. So if you want to amend that agenda, just let me know. I just threw it together.
I understand. I first of all, I appreciate that. I saw you did that. I sent out some emails trying to, to understand availability for the school team. For those who don't know, right? So we didn't see this get posted, but we discussed in our last meeting, doing schools next Monday. It turns out schools have an open forum next Monday with the select board, I believe. So they may or may not want to meet with us the same day. And so I sent an email just asking if they can meet with us next week, preferably Monday, but if not, then maybe one of the other days. Susan, I did not offer Wednesday. I know you have conflicts on Wednesdays. I don't know if others have, conflicts other days, but let's see what the school comes back with. Corey, you're on mute.
I'm talking to my son.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So you're welcome to be on mute. Okay. So that brings us to minutes. Shall we move on?
Yep.
There he is. All right. The newest member of the Capital Budget Committee. Welcome, Mr. Evans.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Corey, how come you don't have matching jammies?
I just haven't
He
changed.
he
yet.
just doesn't have them on.
I gotta go off this meeting, right?
Okay.
Okay, so I think 3 sets of minutes in front of us. Francine's not here, so let's not try to get through the minutes that she put together, because we can't make any adjustments to them. But starting on September 11th, Corey had circulated to us a set of minutes. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review.
Mhm.
Are we ready to okay, and if someone would like, I'd be open to a motion to approve and accept these minutes.
I'll move that we accept the minutes of September 11th.
Would someone
Brian,
accept?
I wasn't present at that meeting.
Okay. Interesting.
I will second.
But Corey, you were there, so we do have 3 people here today that were at that meeting, so we can vote this. There's just checking this. Okay, so roll call vote. Michael Dick,
Mike Dick, aye.
Corey Evans,
Corey Evans, aye.
Brian Host, aye, and Susan Franklin abstains.
Corey, thanks for doing that. For
Yep.
pulling this together and doing a good job on it to boot.
Yes, Corey's going to teach us how to do quick and legally compliant minutes, to at least check the box. Moving on to which interestingly is not something this committee has ever really done, I think, consistently or well. So it's as good a time as any for all of us to learn. Moving on to September 18th. We have a set of minutes that were prepared by taken and prepared by Michael Dick. I had a couple of comments. In the middle of the first page, under the topics, DPW roads and sidewalks, last line says sidewalks are in addition to 1.58 miles per year. It should be 1.85.
Oh, sorry.
The other 2 were just, just nits. In the last paragraph, second line should be a space between lists and town. And further along that line, it says memo include, it should be plural includes, but other than that, I don't have any comments. Does
Good.
anyone else have any other comments on these minutes?
Do not.
Nope.
Okay. So with the inclusion of those 3 minuscule revisions, would anyone like to make a motion to approve these minutes?
I'll move we approve the minutes of the 18th of September for Capital Budget Committee.
Great. Would someone like to second?
Second,
Super. And we'll do a roll call vote. So Michael Dick.
Michael Dick, aye.
Great. Susan Franklin.
Susan Franklin, aye.
Corey Evans.
Abstain, not present.
Okay. Brian Host, aye. Okay. So that's 2 more sets of minutes, and then oh, that's interesting. Okay. And then we have minutes. We're gonna have to do the minutes from the last. Is that right?
The 25th, Francine,
She did that, and I thought I printed them and looked at them, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, do we want to wait until Francine's back before we approve those? Does that make sense?
sure.
I'm just thinking out loud. Okay.
Just to circle back on the missing minutes,
Yes.
I had sent email replies offering to go back through my notes for anything missing, but I need the dates.
Yeah.
So I'll just put that in front of us again, that
Okay, so let's spend a minute on this. So in our one of our recent meetings, Michelle suggested that the town had a resource that was willing to watch our meetings and prepare meetings that would, comply and bring us into compliance very quickly. Michael, you had wisely suggested that we avail ourselves of that service.
Yep.
At that moment, you know, I was conflicted by sort of the hypocrisy of, you know, creating yet more demand for an FTE in town hall, when at the same time, you know, we're constantly sending the message that, you know, we we need more funding. We should be adding less headcount. It turns out that this is a third party that works on an hourly basis at a very attractive rate, does a great job with it. So this isn't adding FTEs, it does add nominal cost, and we would also not be the black sheep committee. It turns out that many committees have used and are using this service. So with that additional information, I'm going to acknowledge that your instincts were spot on at the first go round. And, you know, I've sent an email to Michelle, asking her to put that service in motion, for all minutes that are missing prior to August 1st, which is where we, you know, started, getting back on track. So, I shot you an email. It might not have been clear. If you've already done some sets of minutes, happy to.
No, I'm
Yeah.
I'm standing by if
Okay.
we need me to go back to my notes. And
Okay,
if
got
this
it.
person's gonna go back to the Zoom.
Yeah, no, that person's going to go back to the Zoom and just do it.
Yeah, great.
I'm guessing they probably watch it at about, you know, 200% speed, and we sound like Alvin and Chipmunks, but I'm sure they've got their system.
Right. Good.
Okay, so minutes should be hopefully, and I copied Lisa on that, so Lisa Legg knows that we have a strategy to get, you know, get into compliance on this. So that's it for minutes. Do we want to do liaisons tonight? I just time check. It's 5 after 7. We can chip through a few. I think really the only other item of business that we have to do here is appointing liaisons, and that's probably more pressing for the projects in front of us versus the entire year ahead.
Yeah.
So why don't I suggest that that's where we start at least. And so the projects we have in front of us, roads and sidewalks, right? We've got 2 schools requests. We've got fields and courts, sorry. We've got town hall, police and fire. And then the 2 school requests, right? Which is, one is the maintenance fund. And the other is the
Study of some
study.
kind.
Yep. Let's just call it the study. We will learn more about what that is, hopefully. So those are really the things that we're trying to get to an answer on, right?
I think you should also add a liaison for the stabilization fund and override warrant articles.
Okay, so those are on my list. So the stabilization funds include roads and sidewalks and school maintenance.
Not so much the project itself, but the mechanisms, and the special stabilization funds is brand new.
Yeah.
And needs vetting by capital budget. And so we ought to have a liaison in those discussions on how those special purpose stabilization funds are being structured and presented to the town, so that there is transparency and there is comprehensive understanding on these new funding mechanisms.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I don't think there's been thought yet as to how to present them, other than as part of, you know, the underlying projects, which are actually a series of projects. It's not really a project, which is why they're being structured that way in the first place. But you make a really interesting point, Michael, which is, you know, people will tend to focus on, like, well, roads and sidewalks, we need roads and sidewalks, and not actually pay attention to what the mechanism is, right? If it's all in one shot.
Or understand the mechanism to
Yeah.
make a good choice
or may not even focus on the mechanism, right? It is important that people understand what they're signing up for. So
Exactly.
I guess the question is, certainly we as a committee need to understand the mechanism. And then I think we as a committee need to make sure that it's explained or presented in a way that people who, the taxpayers who actually vote and decide, which is not us, right? We make recommendations, but the taxpayers who ultimately vote on this know what they just voted for, because they're going to get the bill for it.
Ryan, might we
let me
be able
just-
to? Sorry, Mike. Go ahead. The delay here is killing me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Plus, if there are objections, if Capital Budget Committee comes up with objections or observations that would require some kind of course correction in how these mechanisms are being designed and executed, that's outside the scope of an individual project. It's the mechanism itself that we as a Capital Budget Committee might have problems with. So all of that goes to having a liaison with whether it's the long-term financial group or whether it's with the finance director, or with another liaison from advisory, and put our heads together on it. We need to do our due diligence on these new funding mechanisms.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time on this stuff, but it's not appropriate for me to present something as a member of the board to the board. But I think it would be good to invite, perhaps it is the finance director, to just present on the mechanism, the content being solely in another lane. Give us 15 minutes of your time asking about how this is done, how it rolls forward, how we do this. Nothing content about what's in them, but just, so we can at least, I think, Mike, you're spot on. The mechanism is causing concern for a lot of people, and getting through those concerns will allow us to talk about the needs in a way that's productive.
Agreed.
Just as an observation, I think the language that's used in town meeting is going to need to be very clear and plain English, because the state in its infinite wisdom decided to call this mechanism a stabilization fund. A fund is a bank account. There's nothing in it until you fund it. And the other, so I think when you call it a stabilization fund, people think, oh, we're putting away money for some future event. This is the exact opposite of that. Okay, we're actually coming to people and asking for money, and for incremental money, and in these two cases, well, certainly in the case of the roads, we're spending it right away, right? It's setting aside what the state has called it and what the technical language is. The reality is that the road fund is a new tax and a revolving fund, right? It's not what it is according to the words in the legislation, but that is in plain English what it is. So I think we need to be coordinated and make sure that everyone that presents on this, including people from other committees, are consistent and clear and find a way to explain this to people in terms they can understand.
I liked, I think, Rob Hillman, not to jump committees, but last night, I think he funded it with an override with special characteristics. It was a fairly, I appreciated the takeoff on how the Chinese Communist Party usually phrases things. That was what my,
yeah, it is. It is. It's a Prop 2, and we discussed this as a committee a week ago. Ralph said, this seems like an end run. I think my response was, this is an end run. This is a Prop 2.5 override.
This is the run. Yes.
This is a Prop 2.5 override, and it just and because that's something that people don't like, we're going to make sure that the money doesn't get vacuumed off for another purpose. We're going to put guardrails around it. So But okay, so back to the need to get someone in to address our committee. I also think that the rubber's really going to meet the road. Understanding the mechanism is one thing, but there's governance as well, and that's at a local level. Okay, so there has to be policy around this as to, you know, how the money comes out and what it can be used for in terms of each one of these two funds. There is a draft policy that I think has been put together. I will request permission. I know that long-term planning, that working group, I don't want to call it a committee, that working group will be revising that, but it's probably worthwhile to just start getting input. So I will seek to get that draft out to this team shortly.
Folks, there's something else that I think we as a committee should be insisting on whenever we get a tax increase. And that is some validation that the town manager has done everything he can to take on some of the proposed project cost so that the tax increase request is truly the bare minimum. And so I'm using as my frame of reference my stand, my belief that the roads should not be a special stabilization fund, but should be coming out of the budget. Now that I'm not here to start debating that, but my point is that is something that is a consideration that this committee should be debating at some point before we actually get to town meeting.
My tweak for that, Mike, is back to what I said a few weeks ago, which is that it's not the town manager, right? It's select board and advisory that dictate to the town manager what the policy of the town is, right? And I think it's appropriate for the capital budget to have a budget message, which is sent to the select board and the advisory committee regarding our concerns about things and about good fiscal policy when it comes to having capital things. But if the select board says, you know, Chris, go do this, and it's not on Chris if he does it and it doesn't align with our policies, right? That's just not I want to direct your questions to the right kind of bucket. That way they have a chance of whatever, because Chris is just going to do what he's told. And if select board members, including, you know, myself, you know, last year before, you know, aren't understanding that, you know, maybe a select board goal needs to be a 5-year plan to fix capital spending. That should be a goal. And select board members should be informed of that. And that will cause the change that you're seeking. Because that's where the marching orders are coming from.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to expand on what both of you have said, because you're both correct. And I'm going to take it one step further. A few epiphanies I've had recently. One is that, you know, the fact that the capital budget appropriation did not go up last year is less of a mystery to me today, because I happened to watch the select board meeting that took place this week, where OPEB came in, and OPEB was very clear as to what their ask was for this year, both in terms of what they wanted in the budget and what they wanted, you know, out of free cash. And very interestingly, in the amount that they requested in the budget, the number was 350, which, you know, my recollection was they'd always asked for 300. But, you know, the fact is I haven't watched them in whatever 5 or 7 years. It was 300, but they've also built in a 3% escalation in their ask each year. And, you know, they articulated that to the select board, and they've been getting a 3% escalation in their in budget funding each year. Now we have, we've shouted from the hilltops that the funding mechanism for capital is broken, but we as a committee, at least to the best of my knowledge, have never gone to the select board and done what Corey suggested, which is actually present an ask, and explain it and make sure that that ask is at the front end of the budgeting process. We've always just waited for the number to come out of the
Correct.
finance director, after everyone else gets what they ask for. And I think, I think that, we were advocating, but we never actually, as a committee, delivered an ask. And I think Corey sitting here today just affirmed that, because he told us that's what we need to do, which means he's never seen an ask from us before as a select board member.
Correct. Yeah. And that goes a long way. I mean, if you put a fence post in, right, that then you have, all the different places. So if this committee can establish some fence posts, and I think that's completely within our charge. I mean, it's the guidance, right? No one's going to pay attention to this because they assume we are. And if we're not saying this is what the town needs, and this would be healthy, then your capital, I think someone else said, it's always going to be the thing that you ignore. Right? You can always.
I think the miss is that we've articulated it to advisory. We've articulated it to Chris. We never articulated it to the select board.
And firmly. I mean, I think having a firm, I mean, even like a, one pager or some sort of slide deck, stating clearly what we need or what the town needs.
An official ask.
Right.
Yeah. Like,
And
Corey, is it fair to say that you were aware that there was a funding issue at Capitol?
I was aware 6 months in. Diane told me about it. So,
okay.
yeah.
So everyone's aware. They just haven't. So, I mean, we've actually laid the foundation for this. We just never made the ask as a committee.
Well, yeah. And outside of knowing about it, putting it on an agenda, I mean, unless if Capitol has a line item on the agenda regarding the capital budget for the next fiscal year with the select board, you get a conversation, right? Otherwise,
maybe.
Right. Well, it just kind of keeps going in the background. It never,
Right.
I also was waiting for, hey, when is this going to emerge from the underground? It never did. So, yeah.
So thank you for raising the point, Michael. It's been kind of an eye-opening week for me.
OPEB is a great example too of a group of people that really advocate for the policy that needs to happen.
They didn't even really have to advocate. They just explained it and made the ask. That was that,
Well, that wasn't easy. I mean, it took, I know, a few of those members many years of being ignored to get to where they are now. That, the attention they get is not, was well earned.
Yeah. So yeah, we need to put together an ask. Okay, so in terms of liaisons for these projects, does anybody have any predisposed, excitement to be a liaison in any one of these items? They're all wide open. So,
Susan, you and Francine have been going to the schools, correct?
Last year I was on schools, but not prior year.
Right.
And I think last year also had facilities.
Yep.
But in terms
now, are we just, okay. So are we just doing these for tonight? Are we just doing for the projects that are coming at STM? We've got a half.
I think we should. I'm just trying to go back to where we might have had a natural fit.
Yep. So natural fit for school is always good, that either someone who recently had a child come through there or somebody that has a child there, right? Which is, I think, why it was Susan and Francine. Susan recently had one come through, and I think Francine is either still there or about to graduate.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have the children and I'm willing to take the role, but I'm also then conflicted. I don't know kind of what the committee prefers, right? I will, I talk to all those people that are involved, obviously, on my role as select board member, so it's easy for me to jump into that. But I'm going to have a different viewpoint, just even if I try not to. So, which may not be a bad thing. I'm not, either way.
Yeah, I think as long as as long as someone who has a child in the system is paired with someone who has a child, who had a child in the system, we've got both sides covered. it is good to have some empathy in the room, I guess I would say. Someone that gives a perspective of, you know, from of a parent who has a child on the inside.
Yeah, happy to. I mean,
But
I worked on this last time too. So
I guess we're going to hear from the schools on Monday. Yeah, I'm just pausing because Francine's not here, and she is and has been in the school liaison role. Any thoughts on how we deal with that?
Francine?
Picking liaisons today, given Francine's, you know, is a school liaison right now. Do we just leave her there for now? And
Yeah, I would think that we let her know that we'd like her to be the liaison, that Corey will also be doing that, and that the two of them should get together unless her schedule precludes her being able to do that.
okay.
And from what we heard last week, she said for the next year, she is going to be very busy. I don't know how that translates into attendance.
Yeah, which is another conversation. Hold on, let me add that to my list. I need to speak with her just to understand her availability. Susan, are you okay? Assuming Francine holds that spot, do you want to still stay involved in schools? I mean, I don't want to sort of talk past you on this. I mean, you're here. What's your thought?
I mean, I'm open to any of them. You asked which one intrigues me. I've always been interested in seeing the town hall project come to fruition.
Would you like to do that one?
Sure, but if you think you'd like to keep me in schools instead, then I'm open to that too.
Here's my instinct. We've basically got 2 weeks before the warrant goes to print. This is a short-term assignment.
Right.
We can revisit who does what for the regular cycle, you know, for the next 6 months after we get through this warrant, and any follow-up between the warrant and the special town meeting. Because then we'll actually go into cycle. So if you're intrigued by, you know, this town hall project and want to jump on that one, that's one box checked. Is that something you want to do, or?
Yeah, I take it.
Okay. Okay. Police and fire. Michael, you were liaison to police and fire in the past, no?
No, I haven't been, but I am interested.
Okay.
I'd love to join Michael on that one. I've talked with both chiefs extensively on a lot of stuff. So,
okay.
If you were willing to work with me on that, I think we'll have different perspectives.
Yeah.
Different experiences.
Two people listening and asking questions is helpful, I think.
Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give everybody their preferences, and then I'm just going to backfill holes. So Susan, I may be joining you on town hall. I think it makes sense to have 2 people on each one of these, particularly given the short views. You know, more focus is better. So next we have fields and courts.
I could go with that. I've already expressed my skepticism, however, but I'm also willing to listen, of course, and I'll say keep an open mind, but know that right now I have a great deal of skepticism on the amount that's being requested.
Okay, so we should probably just to make sure that we have an audience and the perception of some balance. Is there anyone sort of more excited about these that could pair with Michael so that we have, sort of both sides of the issue?
I don't really have a whole lot of, I'm happy to do it. I don't have a whole lot of remaining questions. I think the discussion with Deer Hill, there's still some gaps in the turf bare spots. I'm not quite sure if it's even possible to get those filled back in though. So, willing to, but also not enthusiastic. Susan, if you'd like to.
I mean,
It's
I'm,
not that
I'm
I'm,
enthusiastic about the idea of improving our fields and courts, but I struggle a little bit with the Dare Hill proposal. Um, I'm a strong proponent of improving our fields and courts.
Whoever wants to do it, I'm literally going to backfill with the open holes, so I'm stuck with all this.
Susan, go ahead. I think if I show my,
yeah,
I think I'm a little too.
Susan, I would say that too. And I think you understand my concerns and my hesitation and would bring that to discussion.
Okay. Roads and sidewalks.
I'd like to go with that. And I do liaise with DPW.
Okay.
Ralph and I do.
Anyone else have a burning desire on this one?
I would do it, but Brian, I think the historical perspective on this, with how the funding has brought in, is probably the most valuable in this point. 'Cause I think
Okay.
that's really the question. I mean, the need, and the cost isn't really there. It's kind of the how do we get here and how do we get out. I think
Yeah,
mechanism.
I also think that capital budget's angst around this one, really comes down to whether or not this should be sort of in the core budget or not. So it's going to be delicate. Okay, so I think you're suggesting that I join that one, Corey. Is that?
I'm happy to volunteer other people, of course.
I got the no, it's good. I got the signal there. School maintenance.
Well, that isn't
Where-
that the same.
Where do we come out on that? Was that
Corey and Francine.
Corey and
Corey.
Francine?
Yeah.
Okay, and the school study?
I would think that's the same group, right?
I mean, yeah, they're both one and the same and also distinctly different, right? That's kind of one of the struggles we're having here. But they affect each other, but they're ostensibly for different purposes.
Yeah.
Put this out together. That'll be fine.
Okay. Stabilization funds, why don't I do that? I'm gonna
I'd like
suggest,
to join you on that.
okay. Okay, and so Susan, you don't have a partner on town hall. I'm happy to join you there unless someone else is eager.
I think it makes sense for the chair to be involved.
Corey, you don't want to jump on that one?
I feel like I've done my time with town hall stuff last round, so
Fair enough.
take a breather.
Okay, so let's just to repeat, town hall is going to be Susan and Brian. Police and fire is going to be Michael and Corey. Fields and courts is going to be Michael and Susan. Roads and sidewalks is going to be Michael and Brian. School maintenance is going to be Corey and Francine. School study is going to be Corey and Francine. Stabilization funds, Brian and Michael. And if Francine can't do it, Susan, you're okay stepping into the 2 school items?
Yep.
Okay. And okay. My guess is, given her time constraints, that's gonna happen. Do you want to reach out to her, or do you want me to reach out to her? I'm happy to do it either way.
I can reach out to her right after the call.
Okay. Okay, and I appreciate your flexibility, Susan, your willingness to sort of shrink to fit and or step up, depending on the answer you get from her. That's extremely helpful. Thank you. Okay, so that's liaisons. Last on our agenda is, well, that I expect is follow-up questions on prior requests. So Michael, I got and Corey, I got the list that the 2 of you assembled on the next set of follow-up questions. which I will get out. I just want to go through that list and see if I have anything to add. And Susan,
Great.
did you guys copy everyone on that, or is it just to me? I think it was brought, did you get copied on that, Susan?
Yeah, I just had an addition to Mike's list, but I didn't have any comments on Corey's.
Okay, I'll take a look at that and then I will forward that on.
Yeah, I didn't send
Okay.
it. I didn't send it. I just sent it to Mike, and then Mike bounced it back to the chair. So I think
Okay.
that is now in the public record. Send that around. One of the things that I just with the questions, right now, because of the time frame, we are competing for attention like we never have before. So I think we need to focus as much as possible on some, whatever our mission critical, and be sure they're clear and drill the themes of those questions together. Because I think if we have there's going to be a lot of things that we're just not going to get answered. If we try to get all the little things, we may not get any answers. This
I
is just
agree.
the reality of the speed of this. We all wish we had more time, but
I agree with you, Corey. I think we need to be extraordinarily succinct. So
And
that
take
even if it's a long
a
list of
more-
questions, it doesn't look like a long list of questions.
correct. Yep.
And actually
I
try and group the questions into a more high level
Yeah.
theme of what we're really trying to get after. Rather than
yeah, and I also think look, in a perfect world where we'd ask every question that was piqued our curiosity. We may need to focus on the questions that would actually cause us to vote one way or the other.
yes.
As opposed to perhaps, going for the comprehensive mastery that we usually seek on these projects.
Well, and to that point, you referenced it earlier, Brian. I mean, this is going to be decided by a ballot, right? So those questions are really the people's questions. Our role in this is a little bit different because, frankly, we don't have any power here. We like to think we do, but
it's remarkable, actually, Corey. I mean, I guess my perception is a little different. I think our power has always come from a place that people don't really understand, which is not the bylaws or the policies. It's from the fact that people know that on capital items, we are the group that drills deep. And they depend on us to do that. And that's really what I think, provides, whatever influence that our opinions ultimately have, not anything else. So it's, it's important that that when we do speak on these items, it's well thought through, I guess is what I'm trying to say. In that tradition.
Right.
I mean, in the simplest form, actually, none of the committees have any power.
That's correct. I said that all the time. Select board. The only thing we can do is give
I
out liquor
mean,
licenses. Everything
yeah,
else is just
Right.
complete fluff. Yeah, I said that all the time.
I mean, I don't. It's. I mean, technically,
It's reductive,
true.
but it's technically true, right?
It's technically true, but the reality is the taxpayers rely on us to do our work and to provide good advice, and that's really where it comes from. So we just need to make sure we continue to do that. Okay. Items not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance. I think I gave the update from CPC last night. Oh, let me give you one other mention just on the update of the CPC. They did decide to vote. I think it was $1.2 million. It might have been 1.3 to fund the majority of the cost of the 4 restricted affordable income housing units at the new town hall. So that vote did take place yesterday. So, that will have an impact. Sorry.
What was the final total?
I'm sorry.
Apologies. What was the final total that they cleared for that? They sent. For
I unfortunately I was not taking as good as notes as I should. I believe it was 1.2 million, Corey. It might have been 1.3.
Okay, thank you.
Right, that number was discussed at the select board meeting the night before.
Yeah.
And that amount covers, I believe, 30% of the cost of those 4 most affordable units.
Yeah, it's actually 70% of the cost.
70%, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Originally, they were going to ask for 30% of like all 14 units, or I don't know what the math was, but they were asking for a lower percentage of all the units. And then they said, wait a minute, let's just have CPC money on these restricted, hard definition affordable unit houses, so that we don't accidentally, bind our flexibility on the others to do things that might not qualify, but could be in the best interest of the town.
Mhm.
Employee housing, for example, seniors, whatever the policy makes sense. So they just didn't want to bind those in a way that might defeat some, frankly, noble intentions. Was there anything at advisory that the rest of the committee should hear for those that watched that meeting last night?
I would say there isn't anything from advisory. They took no votes.
Okay.
They basically were just trying to get their arms around what's in front of them, I think.
Yeah.
I'd
Okay.
put it. And Rob Hillman did a lot of the talking. Although Mike Barclay and Diane Kennedy offered some very interesting and helpful observations.
Are there any that are appropriate to share, just for the benefit of the rest of the committee?
Nothing that I can specifically say right now off the top
Okay.
of my head, just that
Okay.
I was glad to see that they were really engaged,
The
because
engagement was high.
in the past, the advisory tended to be crickets.
Okay. Yeah, it feels like, they may be having the same groups coming to them, perhaps, days or weeks behind us. So we're trying to power through this. But ultimately they need to hear from the exact same advocates independently. And I think some of them have been dialing into our meetings, might even be here tonight. So, and I would encourage, I will say it's been a busy week of meetings for me, watching all these meetings, but I do feel like I benefited immensely by watching select board and then watching CPC, and also watching the public forum on, fire and police and town hall. And I intend to do that. I think I intend to continue that and encourage anyone else that, they can to just watch these exact same items as they either go to the public or go to a different committee. It's helpful. So I think that schools and roads and sidewalks is doing an open forum on Monday at 7 o'clock after our meeting. If you guys have the time and the appetite, you might want to watch it.
Yep.
There may be, is there anything else coming up that people are aware of? I mean, it's Thursday night, so I guess no.
Right. There's 2 more forums, but they're
They're
pushed.
further out.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure there are probably other committee meetings that got posted today for next week. And if they didn't get posted today, they'll get posted tomorrow or Monday. So stay tuned. But yeah, there's a meeting after ours on Monday, assuming we even have ours Monday. And I'll try and get that locked down tomorrow.
Okay.
One last question. If it's not Monday, are people indifferent between Tuesday and Thursday?
My guess is that we would want to tune into a select board meeting on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I'd be inclined to say let's.
My thought is that we'd keep our meetings 5:30 to 7. So that
Just like
we're
tonight.
ahead, we're in advance of, select board.
Yeah.
I just Thursday, I think I'm alone with the kids, so I'll just kind of have my camera off, or you can all listen to me read books. That's fine too.
Well, it's all good.
Just put bedtime books on the agenda will be fine.
All right, or you can just give them Jolt Cola and Skittles and send them into the playroom.
Well, that's what we did today. We did ice cream at farmer's market, then went home and tried to go to bed. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else in terms of items not reasonably anticipated?
No.
Okay. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. I already wrote it in the minutes that I did it. So
Well, that was a race. So who moved? Was it Corey or Michael? Who got there first?
Corey.
All right. Who'd like to second?
I will.
All right, roll call vote. Michael Dick,
Mike Dick, aye.
Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, I.
Corey Evans,
Corey Evans, aye.
Brian Host, aye. The time is 7:44. The meeting is now adjourned.